So, a friend of mine asked me why I no longer have cold openings for my videos. The answer is much simpler than you would imagine. Due to the pandemic, nothing much has been going on in my life. It has been a stagnant period during which everything came to a stop, so Donald Trump is quite frankly the most quality entertainment I had for a while. However, something big happened this week and has shed some light and hope on my life. Liverpool has finally won a Premier League title. You might not feel the gravity of this victory. This is the very first Premier League title won by a top-tier team ever since it was founded 2 centuries ago. Sure, before the Premier League was established, Liverpool had been the kings of England and Europe for a very long time, but the last league title was 30 years ago. I won't pretend to be a Reds fan my whole life because it's just not the case, but for the 12 years of my life following Liverpool's ups and downs, highs and lows, this silverware is long overdue. We went through failing at the last minute, being the highest scoring second place, coming close to the title numerous times but missing it by an inch. This season, we won. Simple as that. We won with 7 more games to play. We won with the hopes to shatter countless records and make our own. We won in spite of the global pandemic and facing against some of the best teams in Europe, and yet we have prevailed. This will be a motivational triumph that I will remember for the rest of my life as a reminder that even in the darkest times, just as the team anthem goes, you'll never walk alone. It's all well and good, but Liverpool winning the title has absolutely nothing to do with our discussion on PTE today. It's just something of an extraordinary level that can be very aspirational, which you can agree we all need a few at the moment. We will continue our walkthrough on Reorder Paragraphs, and let's dive right in. This is a question type which gives you a few sentences, but their order has been scrambled. You are to find the correct order of the text by looking for logic, references, and many other clues that we have discussed at length in the crash course. The most important thing for you to remember is how the scoring works, which also helped us come up with numerous strategies. You get points not by putting sentences in the correct positions, but for the correct adjacent pairs. Let's go through the example one more time, which will clear everything up if you're still confused. If the correct answer is ABCDE, the total possible score is 4 points. You will get 3 points for EABCD, even though all sentences are no longer in the right positions. If you give the answer ADCBE, however, that is a 0. We cool? Let's look at some examples. This is an interesting one, a little piece about the Valentine's Day which we still celebrate nowadays. Time to go through the individual sentences and look for clues, starting with sentence A. We will continue our glorious tradition of ignoring problematic words, so I will not spend time talking about how a priest differs from a bishop. Not only because I don't want to, I also don't know the difference. It doesn't matter as long as you can tell that there are 3 different people, with the clues being one, another, and third. That's it. That's literally the most important clue you can find in sentence A. Of course, we can make some predictions about what sentences will come before and after sentence A. I will say the next sentence should further discuss the 3 dudes who happen to share the name Valentine, and the one before should be an introduction to them. How lucky are we? This is exactly what sentence B talks about. Right away, we can find the pair BA. Sentence B is a very typical example of what I mentioned before on how sentences might have 2 halves. The second half of sentence B leads to the next one, which is sentence A, being the introductory mention of the 3 dudes. The first half of sentence B, on the other hand, would probably be talking about the Pope. We also have a good tell that sentence B phrases it as this early Pope, suggesting that the Pope is most likely brought up earlier. Sentence C seems to do the trick quite well. I swear, I didn't make this up. I just used the original order in the practice questions. Sentence C should come before the pair BA because we need a sentence that introduces us to the Pope, and then sentence B can start making references to him. If we look into sentence C a little more carefully, we will find the phrase "this pagan festival." Whatever pagan means, I think you should know what a festival is, and I think you should definitely know what this is. The word "this" tells you that the festival is probably talked about before, once again fulfilling the requirements for future references. Good stuff. The sequence CBA will get us half of the points without putting in too much effort. Looking at sentence D, there isn't much that we can find. However, even though there might not be clue words to be utilized, we can definitely tell that this sentence is probably somewhere in the front. The reasoning is simple. This is a very general introduction to the upcoming topic. Sure, we said that looking for the first and last sentences is useless, but if you can see certain patterns in the flow of logic, go for it. The reason that it is useless is because you still need the sentence right next to it to get the point, and oftentimes it is very difficult to specifically look for them. If they come up while you are doing something else that's more efficient and secure, that's just a bonus. Moving on to the last sentence, sentence E seems to tie everything together nicely. It should be quite obvious that the holiday's roots in the first half of the sentence is a clear reference to Valentine's Day, and the ancient Roman festival in the second half is talking about this pagan festival. Isn't it nice that one sentence uses the exact same words just so that you won't miss the clues? The correct sequence is DE-CBA. Still warming up? No problem. Here is another easy one. I gotta be honest with you, I don't think Reorder Paragraphs questions can get any simpler than this, so I expect everyone to get a perfect sequence. You should have all the tools and the intellect to do this without any issue. This question includes quite a few numbers, but oftentimes this is a good sign because numbers, just like times, usually follow a very logical order. Going back to our strategy of finding a logical pair to start the question, it should come as no surprise that sentence D is right in front of sentence A. Not only do the floor numbers have a nice ascending order, you also have sentence A beginning with above that. This is a very direct tell that you should be able to use without any issues. Right now, we have the pair DA. Here's why this question is very easy. The pair DA is arguably not the most straightforward pair you can find. Many of you might have found the pair CB. The reasoning is even more sensible. They share the word estimated, and sentence B is the one making the reference, so it should be behind sentence C. So there you go, 2 pairs for 2 points without too much hassle. Naturally, the next question would be which pair should be in the front. It would make a lot of sense for the pair CB to be in front of DA. Sentence C talks about the total number of floors the building has, and then sentences D and A talk about what facilities occupy which floors. The sequence CBDA is guaranteed to give you 3 points. Now, what about the last point? Even if you can't see any logical links between sentence E and the rest, you should be able to tell that sentence E is making an introductory comment on the building, so it should be put at the very beginning, making the correct sequence E-CBDA. If only all Reorder Paragraphs questions are this simple, am I right? Well, one can only hope. Here is a slightly more challenging one, an interesting little passage about the Olympic Games. Let's go through the sentences one by one and see what we can find. In sentence A, we begin with the idea, so we should pay close attention to any mentioning of an idea. Exactly what the idea is doesn't really concern us, but if you can have a little more understanding of the rest of sentence A, you will know that it has something to do with the modern Olympics. Also, you should be able to tell from the word modern that any time the passage talks about the modern version of the competition should be placed behind sentence A, and chronologically, any discussion about the ancient version should be placed in the front. There is a reason that the author used an adjective to distinguish the Olympic Games from different time periods. If there is no need to talk about the before and after, the word modern would simply be unnecessary. So far so good. Moving on to sentence B, immediately we can find a specific date. Without any interpretation, it is a good habit to have to start looking through the rest of the sentences right away for mentioning of other times. It doesn't take long for us to find that there are some other years being brought up in sentence E, so the pair EB should be something you can put down without too much effort. Of course, we might end up with some sentences between EB, but E has to be before B. We know this much for sure. What else can we find in sentence B? Well, there was a French dude and he was speaking to a group of people. This is a sentence that we can use a little reading comprehension and structural simplification that we have talked about in the multiple choice videos. The dude is the subject of the sentence, but the predicate is being separated from the subject by the insertion of a clause. The clause tells us that he was talking to a bunch of leaders, but since it's not the core structure, we know that the word proposed is the predicate here. He proposed something about the ancient games, which meets our expectations that the games have ancient and modern versions. Whatever to be revived means, having a little understanding of the phrasing to be done tells you that it is something that is yet to happen. So to put everything together, he's talking to a bunch of people about something that might happen in the future. I don't know what you call this in your native tongue, but that to me sounds a lot like having an idea. Sure, I don't have to make such a wide detour to explain this. I could have just told you that the word propose precisely means offering an idea, but we are trying to do things assuming some of you have very little knowledge about the vocab, and this also helps to demonstrate some core concepts of reading comprehension and techniques for reorder paragraphs. It would come as no surprise that sentence A should be placed behind the pair EB, simply because sentence A is referring to the idea being proposed in sentence B. The sequence EBA is something we have for now. A little bit of work is still needed to get the whole thing, but we're already halfway through. Looking at sentence C, we can see another mentioning of the modern Olympics, suggesting it should come behind sentence A, simple as that. If this isn't clear enough, another clue you have is the phrasing 2 years later, so something happened 2 years before, and it should be made clear in the passage. 2 years prior to the birth of modern Olympics, our French dude was making a speech to a bunch of people about his idea. Perfect logical sense for C to be behind EBA. The placement of sentence D might be a little tricky. I think you should be able to see that it should be placed at the very end, because the Americans and Greeks winning medals should happen during one specific event, and the only individual event we have in the passage is the first modern Olympics. Also, you can argue that the Americans don't have that long of a history, so it should happen sometime around our French dude making the speech. Just as we talked about when we introduced strategies, even if you can't see the logical connection here, the easiest way is to just leave the outlier either at the beginning or at the end, just to avoid messing up the beautiful sequence that you know for sure is correct. The correct answer here is EBACD. Still not difficult enough? Challenge accepted. Here comes one of the most difficult questions I have seen in other versions of practice material. I gotta say, this question is very difficult to explain. It took me quite a while to find somewhat of a decent logical way to articulate how I was able to do this question, but I will still try my best to make everything as clear as possible. Following our golden tradition, we will start with whichever sentence that just happens to be the first one. One thing to notice right away is the phrasing "these examples," which tells you that there are examples before sentence A, and there should be some explanation as to what the examples are for. Then we end up with 2 long pieces of text to introduce us to this person, Hannah Holmes. By now, your PTE instincts should tell you to go through the other sentences very quickly to see if there exists another mention of this person. We do find her name being brought up once again in sentence D, and we should have no problem to see that D should be put before A. Sentence D seems to be making an introduction to this person, so it should be at the front. Let's have a little test to see if you're already a PTE veteran. It makes a lot of sense for D to be in front of A, but does it make sense for D to be right in front of A? At the end of sentence D, the author was talking about a certain Homo sapiens. This is the Latin name for humans used in biology, which is something that you should know, as it will very likely show up somewhere else during the test. So, we are talking about how humans are different with other animals in terms of traits and behaviors. Good stuff. It should come clear to you that this is a very general statement, and we have no specific examples yet to move on to sentence A. This is the definite clue that something else should be between sentences D and A, namely the examples, and the examples should be talking about how we are different. This seems to be where you might get stuck. Sentences B and C both talk about us humans and the other animals, either by directly writing other animals or giving some specific species as in beavers and moles. Sentence E doesn't mention the other animals in any shape or form, but the superlative degree of adjectives tells you that we are being compared to something else, so the other animals are still in the discussion, albeit implicitly. This poses a dilemma. All 3 sentences B, C, and E should be placed between the DA pair, but in what order? The only thing we know for sure is that sentence B cannot be the first among the 3 because it begins with the word and, which tells you that it isn't the first example. Then the best way to explain the logic is how both sentences D and B talk about other animals, while in sentence E there is no direct mention. Remember how subtopics need to be fully discussed before moving on to other ones, so the fact that sentence C still has direct mentions to other species, it should make sense for the 3 examples to be ordered CBE. After placing them between D and A, thus making the final sequence D, C, B, E, A, you will get the full score. This logic is much less ironclad than what we have been using for other questions, so I would like to make another go at convincing you that this is the correct order. Another way to look at this is to split the sentences into two halves. Sentence C begins by talking about what we can do and end with two types of other animals. This is a direct elaboration from sentence D, talking about how we are different. Sentence B has the first half focusing on other animals, picking up the discussion on other animals right after sentence C. The second half of sentence B moves back to us humans, so sentence E is purely dedicated to us, with the other animals only being discussed sparingly and between the lines. Hope this makes everything a little clearer. One final way that I would like to explain the legitimacy of this sequence is to point out how sentences C, B, and E gradually increase in complexity and length. This is a very common practice in writing where if you need to use a few sentences to do the same job, here being giving examples to explain how we are different, they usually become longer and more elaborate as you move on. This is a technique that very occasionally comes into play when doing reorder paragraphs questions, but only the ones that seem to lack obvious logic or are quite difficult to understand. And in my opinion, based on past experiences, this question just happens to be both, indeed making it quite challenging, but it's definitely doable, and it shows once again that even the most difficult questions for reorder paragraphs are still heavily oriented around techniques. You don't need to have much understanding of the passage or many of the words, and you can still do very well. That'll be all for today, some reorder paragraphs questions to demonstrate the strategies and tools at your disposal to greatly simplify this question type. I hope you have learned something useful today, and please like, subscribe, and share with your fellow test takers. There seems to be a book written by a former White House advisor on the ridiculous things happening in the White House, and the president is doing everything he can to prevent the book from being published. You better bet that I'll buy the book if it does get to be printed, and I'll see you all next time.